Okay, everyone, welcome to Mountaineer Farm Talk. My name is JJ Barrett. I'm the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Agent for Wood County for WVU Extension. Farm Talk is a weekly podcast featuring interviews with Extension Service professionals and other agriculture experts about timely topics important to West Virginia agriculture. Our mission is simple: to provide educational, research-based information to people all across the Mountain State. And we have two special guests with us today. We have Tom Baisden. Tom, how are you doing?
Very well.
Tom is our nutrient management extension specialist. He's stationed up in Morgantown. And then we have Ben Goff with us from over in Mason County. Ben, how are you doing?
Surviving.
Surviving? Yeah, as you can see, I got my, anytime it's below 20 degrees, I got my Marty Stewart handkerchief on here for cold weather. Keep that cold air out. We had 12 degrees here in Parkersburg, but I guess that we are headed down to the weather. AccuWeather said 1 degree tonight, so going to be a little chilly. Today we're going to be talking about high fertilizer prices. Anyone that is involved with agriculture or and affect as well the gardening and turf industry, fertilizer prices have doubled over the last 6 months, and that's why we brought Ben and Tom on this morning to talk about some winning strategies or some ways to deal with those prices. I guess we can start off with Tom. Maybe talk a little bit about I guess we'll start out with what's causing some of the fertilizer prices to skyrocket.
So it's a good opening topic, and do some Google searches, and Farm Bureau has a couple economists, Shelby Myers and Veronica Nye, that have a really good article on their it's through the market intel part of Farm Bureau, and there's just too many factors to count that are causing this. We have a whole situation with getting things to market now. We've got ships that are stuck out off the coast waiting in line. That's a factor. We have China that banned exports of phosphate, and they're the #1 phosphate producer. So it's a global market. So if you have a country that is the largest producer of DAP, and suddenly they say, "Nah, we're keeping all the DAP for ourselves," suddenly there's a scramble around the world, and so that's why we've seen that price go up. Ammonia or nitrogen prices are fixed with the price of natural gas. And again, what happened last February was we had this freeze in Texas, and it shut down nitrogen plants across the Southwest, and so they got backed up on their production of nitrogen, and they had enough for 21, but they also had Ida that came in, and that stopped production in those facilities. And then just the price of gas itself has jumped, and that variable cost on ammonia production is about 70% of the variable cost is the price of natural gas. So it's just a complete snowstorm blizzard of kind of bad, and we're sort of coming out of COVID, so we had a sort of suppressed demand over the last 2 growing years. And then guys, when people had commodity prices like we had this year, everybody's like fence row to fence row, and so the expectation is everybody's going to try to grow more because commodity prices are up. And so that's kind of it in a nutshell. But go back and read this article by these two economists, because it is a good piece, and it really, we've been through this before. 2008, we had a similar situation. That was more of a speculative type of program where people sort of bid up the price of fertilizer. It was up for a year, and then it came back down over by 2009. So it's where we're at now. Now we just need to try to be strategic with how we use our fertilizer this spring, and choose our fields where we'll get the biggest bang out of it. But within this article that I just finished reading, our use has really decreased nationally due to precision agriculture. And I think that that JJ wanted me to talk about, what are the opportunities for getting fertilizer on at a more refined application method. And I think that we have some opportunities there with some new technology that we purchased to put out in the field this year.
Yeah, Tom, we'll get to that. Let's go to Ben. What are some of your thoughts on the what Tom's discussing, the causes of this spike in fertilizer prices?
I mean, like Tom said, it's kind of a perfect storm of scenarios. Like China and the exports, there's been tariffs. And I think Tom kind of hit on the head. We just kind of, I think they will come down eventually. Depending on where you look at, some people, for this growing season, it doesn't look very promising, but they will eventually come down. And I think the main thing is trying to develop a plan to get through the year. So,
right, and let's dig right into that. I sent Ben and Tom a list of questions, and we'll hit a few of those. First, let's talk about we're going to be discussing, or we're always talking about the high or fertilizer prices, fertilizer rates, and the amounts. But how important is lime this year, which might be the building block of the fertility program? I'll start with you, Ben.
Even when prices are low, I think lime is always one of the best ways to start, or at least taking a soil test to know where you're at. Lime pretty much determines availability of nutrients. And there's a lot of other factors that can go benefits from that. But I think one of the main one is, if you get too low of a pH, too high of pH, there's a lot of nutrients, especially micronutrients, that become less available. Phosphorus is known, which is not a micronutrient, but you get kind of outside what we consider an ideal range. It's getting less available due to interactions with calcium or aluminum, depending on which side of the pH scale. So I think that's always a good place to start. I think this year in particular, if producers have never taken a soil test, this is the year to take a soil test, without a doubt. I think right now the critical thing is knowing what, there's an old saying that some people, and I kind of use it probably too much, but if you don't test, you're forced to guess. And I think, getting a soil test gives you an accurate information about where you need to be at, and you can make decisions on if you need to cut in a certain area once you get that. I would say if you had a soil test last fall, I think that's fine, but I wouldn't be using a soil test from 2-3 years ago. I know sometimes with producers, especially hay producers, it seems like, well, I took one 4 or 5 years ago. I would try to get it most up to date as you can. Like if you took towards the end of the last growing season, I think you're probably okay. But I think that's probably the best place to start.
Yep. From planning purposes, soil test results are good for, no more than 3 growing seasons. And really, there are some people that, if you're in row crops, then annual soil testing is almost no option.
Yeah, the Tom, I might go back to you for this question. Maybe we'll start with we'll talk a lot about row crops and of course hay and pasture, but our nitrogen prices are up about 200%. Um, how will that affect our, first maybe talk about our hay and pasture fields? Can we afford to cut back a little bit on our nitrogen rates, or what are some other ways we can do to maintain yields for hay and pastures with these high fertilizer prices?
Well, I think that our recommendations are based on either a 3-cut system, and we look at about 60 units of nitrogen per cut, and so I think for the livestock producers that are raising tall grass hay, they need to meet their feeding needs for the winter. And so from that standpoint, I think that they should probably only start out with 60 units of nitrogen if that's their method of production. If they're in a clover-based system, and very few of our farmers really are, most people will use a nitrogen program with their hay. I think that they should, look at their yields with a 60 units of nitrogen for their spring application, along with their, let's just talk about nitrogen for now. And then if they should see what their yields are and see what their feeding needs are, and then make that decision on another 60 units for a second cut. We think that split applications are by far the most efficient use of nitrogen. And the other caveat with applying urea, which is our common nitrogen source, is to try to catch it with a precipitation event within the 24 hours that you apply that product, especially in the summertime where you have the heat that will cause a more rapid loss of nitrogen on that second nitrogen application.
Thanks, Tom. That's brings up a good point about a little bit more the efficiency of split applications for fertilizer, especially nitrogen. I think maybe we don't emphasize that enough as far as a management tool for some of our producers. Ben, what are some of your thoughts on this?
On the nitrogen, I mean, I think, splitting those up is going to be key. In the summertime too, another option, especially if you can't quite hit it around a weather time or around a weather event or precipitation event. I mean, some of these inhibitors, volatilization inhibitors can be useful. Now, like if it's spring of the year green up, I think it may not be. You're really looking at kind of degrees where you're getting above what's probably 70, 80 degrees or so during the day when you have probably your most volatilization. It seems like an added expense. I know, especially if you've never used it before. I know we've done some studies in Kentucky in summer applications and even stockpiling. We showed a benefit, and it was economical. It usually adds maybe about 5 cents per pound of nitrogen.
So, are you talking about the Agritane product?
Agritane, you can get Agritane mixed with it. There are some products like Super U, which is Agritane mixed with a nitrification inhibitor. I mean, I'll defer to Tom. I don't really know if a nitrification would be as big a deal on most pastures. It could be. I mean, that's something to consider, especially when nitrogen's about $1 a pound now. Another nickel's not going to be that much of that's not going to break you on cost. I think anything you can do to kind of split that up or make it more use efficient, I think you're going to be in your best benefit. I mean, in terms of like hay, yeah, I think 60 pounds is probably the max at you would ever want. 60 pounds of nitrogen. And I think it's important. Sometimes we think of pounds of fertilizer versus pounds of nutrient, and I'm talking about about 60 pounds of nutrient.
Okay, Ben. Maybe something else I might hit. We haven't talked about on the program. Considering the prices have doubled, how important is equipment calibration and maintenance this year? I'll start with you, Ben, and go to Tom.
It depends on how good a job you're doing from the start, I guess. If you're in the past, if your equipment is fairly accurate, within 5-10%, I think you're probably okay. But I think, this year, I think the key is putting on as minimum as you need. And that's part of this, knowing what you actually need, and then the other side of that is make sure you're actually putting on that rate. So I think calibration it isn't something that takes a whole lot of time to do, but it very well could be. I mean, a lot of people put so much pounds of fertilizer and go around and around until you use it up. I think, as long as you kind of have that ballpark, that's probably okay, but it doesn't take long to calibrate a spreader. So
definitely be a good use of your good return on your time, right?
Yeah. I think you could potentially make sure you're knowing what you're putting on.
So let me jump in with a little bit of calibration or precision right now, because we can start our nitrogen program here in the next 2 weeks with legume applications, inoculated legume seed, and the biggest payback that UK saw on a poster that they presented at AFGC was using precision guidance to apply frost seed on pastures. And so again, we have that technology. I'd really like to see those GPS units out there and utilized to apply expensive red clover seed that are inoculated the morning that you go out after you've had a good hard freeze, used to minimize underlap and overlap, and start your nitrogen program on your pastures, in the month of February.
I agree.
Right. We discussed frost seeding last week. Go ahead, Ben.
Well, I was going to say, if all these articles coming out about managing for fertilizer prices, it seems like there's a lot of people are kind of overlooking the legumes, the clovers part of it. Like Tom said, frost seeding, especially if you use GPS or make sure you're calibrating that, it's one of the cheapest sources of nitrogen. It takes a lot of energy, but the plant's paying the bill. I think when you get that too, you have to follow that up with good management to make sure you're managing that clover. If you're grazing, make sure you graze it down to the clover. I think how much nitrogen that clover will fix is good rule of thumb is basically it's going to be proportional how big that plant is. So if we're undergrazing and we're not getting that clover starting to get shaded out, I think you really have to manage for that. And actually grazing helps some of that nitrogen turnover to be more available. Some of the other things, make sure pH is right. For a grain crop situation, cover crops, I think, it's too late this year to really do anything from on a cover crop nitrogen standpoint, but next year plan for that and not just having, personally, I think some of the legume components or how much nitrogen getting from legumes in a cover crop we're kind of overestimating, but having some of those grain crops and grasses in that cover crop mix is another good way to fix that. I mean, you're looking at, your wheat, your rye, triticale, whatever, ryegrass, whatever it is, those are easily capable of they're not fixing it, they're capturing it. So we kind of have a slow leak of nitrogen for mineralization during our kind of warm weathers. And having something out there, you're easily going to capture 50 to 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre with just having a good grass cover crop in there.
Yeah, Ben, a follow-up. We were talking about this last week. Of course, the most widely available legume out there is our ladino and white clover in our pasture fields, and then probably next red clover. About how much nitrogen do they produce? How much nitrogen per acre? I'm not going to say free, but how much they provide.
How much they provide? I would, on a pasture where you're seeing, that's the thing. It will fix a lot. Not a lot is available. I mean, I think depending on the growth and everything's condition, you're looking at probably anywhere from 100, 250 pounds of nitrogen fixed.
Really?
Now, the other side of that is that it's not all available, and it's not all available 1 year. And so I think, for people who are able to maintain clovers in a pasture for a long time, that's where you get your benefit. It's a long-term nitrogen source. How much is available depends on, obviously, how much growth there is. That plant has done a lot of work to fix that nitrogen. It's not going to give it up for free. So anything, you're going to have tissue turnover from, grazing it, passing through the animal. The animal is the perfect harvesting equipment. You got a harvester equipment in the front, fertilizer spreader on the back. Going through that process makes that nitrogen more available. Just the fact of grazing, some of those roots start to slough off and die, and some of those nodules where that nitrogen is fixed. So reliably, Tom probably could give you a better number than I would, but I would say, I don't know, probably 60 to 120 pounds from the year probably is available. I don't know, Tom, do you have a better estimate on that or a different perspective?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. You can go with a nitrogen program that's ammonia based, and yes, you can get higher yields because that ammonia is available and readily available. So when we give our recommendations for tall grass hay nitrogen fertilized, we're always giving you at least an extra ton of yield compared to legume based nitrogen hay production, where you have no nitrogen applied. So there is a little bit of a yield penalty comparatively, but when you look at the price of red clover seed and getting that into a sward compared to commercial nitrogen prices, I think you'll want to get out there and put your insulated coveralls on and go and frost seed.
There was a real good paper came out in the 80s from NC State, and like Tom said, it's when does it become more economical? It depends on the price of nitrogen. With legumes, again, it's a long-term investment. And I think the bottom line at about 50 pounds a night, or 50 cents per pound of nitrogen, what it cost, it took them about 1.5 years to kind of recoup some of those losses. But keep in mind, now we're double that price of nitrogen. So I think economic wise, the cost of the law of returns, I think it's without a doubt, you're going to probably want to see a return this year, or compared to what the prices are, be more economical.
Maybe this might be a question for both you, Ben and Tom. Switch gears just a minute to maybe our row crop and our vegetable producers. Can they afford, considering all other input costs and how it will affect their yields? Can they afford to cut back on some of their fertilizer application rates, especially nitrogen? We know that our corn, not so much soybeans, but corn and a lot of our vegetables and wheat really rely on nitrogen for yield, for production. What are your thoughts on that? We'll start with Tom.
I think that if we look at the three major nutrients and NPK for specialty crop production or for row crop production. I think that we really have to start, looking at our soil tests and saying, I'm going to use my banked, my banked P or my soil K this year, and I'm just going to focus on phosphorus if that's. And I think that we really need to look at what our, it goes back to the law of the limiting. What's the most limiting nutrient that you have across the three, and maybe we will adjust yield goals with our nitrogen program, and instead of shooting for 180 bushels of corn, maybe this year, if the prices stay strong, we can still stay in the black with 150 bushels of corn yield and have a less of a nitrogen bill. But so I think that for P and K, we really need to look at what we can rely on from the soil and what will be yield limiting. And so if you're in low or low medium, those are sort of triggers to where you're going to have to put some of that fertilizer on to get your optimum yield.
Ben?
I agree with that 100%. I think this is where a lot of times we still got, it's cold today, it's going to be cold next week. It's a good chance to sit down with a calculator and pencil or Excel sheet if you're more inclined, but sit down and figure out what's the trade-off. What it all comes down to profitability. And, with row crops, it might be okay to sacrifice. It should be about profitable yield, not maximum yield. And so, if 150 bushels an acre is going to be more economical this year, then I think you're going to have to think about it. Same way with the hay crop. Now, some of these, I guess maybe you call them direct market crops, where you're actually, corn we're going to haul, we're going to get what price we get for it. And there's some marketing strategies I think we might think about with those crops. But like for a hay crop where you're going to sell off farm or some of this produce, you also need to think about charging a price to represent the investment. I think some of the hay we sell is drastically under. Sometimes we're selling it for at fertilizer costs. We really need to account for some of the other sides of that. But I think right now is the best time. It's cold, it's snow on the ground, not much to do other than get equipment ready, sit down and start figuring out a financial plan. Where can we cut cost? Is it yield? What is a reasonable yield to shoot for?
Yeah, so I would agree with you. I looked at a group of 9 soil test returns from a specialty crop farmer, a vegetable crop farmer outside of Morgantown here, and all of his fields were in very good shape. And so for I would be very conservative with my P and K applications, and I would focus on nitrogen for his vegetable crop production this year. So I think that we really can, for those vegetable production, fruit production that have done a good job, and when you look at that's not for their returns. Fertilizer prices are not as they're not as break even as commodity crop growers. Those guys are right on the edge of profitability all the time. So I think that all of our specialty crop high tunnels, pull samples, and I think that they can go to a nitrogen program in a lot of cases and not worry about their P and K this year.
Tom, we'll move on a little bit for anyone that has livestock. How important, I guess, in the all of us are crunched for time. And I know that when I dairy farm, that there's 3 fields that are right next to that butt up to the driveway to the barn, and those usually got heavily manured in early spring. How Talk a little bit about maybe the importance of manure for fertility program with our livestock producers and how they can manage that a little bit better.
Well, it's storage is always uh, a big issue. Handling facilities, manure storage, and what I find is that the least talked about area on those producers that have a winter feeding barn with a manure storage is bedding, and bedding allows for a real improved capacity to hold some of the more mobile nutrients such as potash. And so, if you have an opportunity, you drive down the road, you see junk hay along the field, and you have an opportunity to haul that home and use that as bedding, that is a great source to kind of use as a sponge for the urine based potassium that's coming out of those cows that you're scraping and putting into your manure storage. So that's I think that's the start of the story. But then, calibration of manure spreaders is a nasty business, but it really it can be done relatively easy. You can use your area and load it up, and you use a 5-gallon bucket. You look at your density, you figure out what your capacity of your spreader is, and then you go and apply. Now, we have a free service for manure analysis, and that is really the second step once you've done a good job with your storage, is to be able to sample that manure. And I always like just using a shovel and going around the pile and making a small pile off to one side on the concrete, and then mixing that small pile up with the shovel, and then getting a portion of that, once you've mixed that up, into a Ziploc baggie and off to the Moorfield Manure Lab, which offers a free service. I mean, then you know what you've got, and then you can calibrate your spreader and go to the fields that are least frequently applied to, if possible, or that have the most need from a fertility standpoint this year, because that'll be your cheapest nutrient source.
Man, you want to chime in there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Tom always does a good job on that. And I guess I'm going to throw it back to Tom. I mean, Tom, I think this year some of these, not just manure or, cow manure from feeding areas, but biosolids and poultry litter. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you're an expert on that.
Absolutely. I mean, and not only that, I mean, for folks that are specialty crop producers, but also, if you can, there's mushroom compost. Mushroom compost is produced, by the ton, and it's a nutrient dense product. Poultry litter. I'm wondering how the guys over east are going to handle poultry litter, if it's going to be available, or if they're going to wrap their arms around it and we won't see it for a few years, because they'll take care of local folks around them. That's understandable. But biosolids, we did some a 3-year study, and we had some good yields. It doesn't have a lot of potash in it, but it has a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus, and we got some good quality hay from that's a regulated product. So we put it on at the DEP prescribed rate of, 12 wet tons per acre. It's not the prettiest product, but it grows grass.
Yeah, as a reminder, anyone that's tuning into the program, you can either ask a question for Tom or Ben, or you can put a message in the chat box and we will answer those questions. Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
I was gonna say, to follow up on what Tom said, I think hay is an underlooked source too. Any kind of, especially if it comes from off farm, any feed source off farm is a potential fertilizer source. Bale grazing, I think, like Tom said, kind of be strategic about where you might put those out at. If one field's gonna be low fertility, a typical hay field 4x5 roll is gonna have anywhere from 15, 20 pounds of nitrogen, 7 to 15 pounds of P2O5, about 20, somewhere around 25 to 30 pounds of potash. So I think, if you can buy cheap hay, and especially put it out and feed it, I think that's something to think about too.
Okay. Let's switch gears here and move to a topic that I think probably provides the most opportunity for improving efficiency and saving money, and that's this precision agriculture with GPS, as far as not only spreading fertilizer, but it can be used for spread lime and for spraying some of our fields. Tom, we'll move to that. You can talk a little bit about the availability of those GPS units around the state and how we can producers can use those to more precisely apply fertilizer and seeds to our fields.
Okay, so last year we had an opportunity to spend some money that we'd sort of been trapped with COVID, not been able to travel, and so collaborated with our unit director and made a purchase of 7 tractor mounted GPS units, sort of beginner model, very easy to use, to be used for everything from, spraying pesticides, if that's your activity, or applying manure, or applying fertilizer, or frost seeding clover seed, as I said earlier. And so those are spread around the state. We have a little bit of a focus in the Eastern Panhandle with the Chesapeake Bay, because we want, we sort of want to take a emphasis over there. We have 3 units over there. The rest of them are distributed around the state. I have one myself. Actually, I don't have it because a farmer has it. The biggest problem I find is that once you hand it out and show a farmer how to use it, they don't want to give it back. So it's a real opportunity to sort of know where you're at and know where you've been, and so you don't overlap, and you don't have gaps. And it's I don't want these things to sit on the shelf, and if any growing season can get them off the shelf and out there and introduced to the farming public, this should be the spring.
Right. Ben, you want to talk a little bit about the precision ag and how this will can help us to be a little bit more efficient, either for not over or under applying fertilizers?
I mean, I think with many of the row crop guys are probably already kind of set up, or, can do it very easily. But I think even, pasture, like, Tom talked about with the frost seeding, his units are fairly simple to use. I think if not, your county agent should be able to figure it out with you. Even in a normal year, I think it's something to consider. other than that, Tom is more kind of the expert on that. So I mean, I think it's a great tool and it will eventually save up, save cost. So.
Yeah, I think the focus should be and will be on our, forage-based production, where technology, that kind of technology has just sort of never had a presence, and we've never made that shift. You go across the Ohio River and like everybody's got GPS and self-guided tractors, and we come over to our farming community, and the pasture hay farms are they have not adopted that.
I think anybody who uses it's going to be pleasantly surprised. And I think, there's a lot of work being done, not just from the fertility standpoint with precision ag on the forage side, but also like measuring forage yields, forage mass, kind of use that to develop your grazing system about where you need to go next, stuff like that, stuff with drones. I mean, I think if you're interested, this is a good step to get your feet wet. But I mean, the possibilities are endless, I think, with some of this precision ag stuff.
Yeah, I guess both this question, this might be a toughie for, it's important that we have good fertility program, monitor nutrient levels on our fields. What about maybe a producer that's got a field that's maybe it's a hay field, or maybe they just picked it up from on a lease that's got extremely low fertility, low phosphorus levels, a low pH. How would you advise them to tackle that for this year? We'll start with Ben.
I'd say don't basically follow everything we've said. Don't apply a triple 19. I was actually kind of looking at something I was kind of working on, triple 19 versus just a custom rate. I mean, obviously get your soil test. We know what you need and go from there. But so many people just think, oh, I'll just throw down just a commercially available versus a custom blend. And so I kind of did a little bit of quick analysis on what an average hay field is needed in Mason County. And it turns out the custom mix was $6 more per acre. But you start going through it, you're actually, if you just use kind of the same rate, about 550 pounds an acre, you're over applying about 40 pounds of phosphorus and under applying 34 pounds of potash per acre. So you're not meeting the fertility needs. And we start looking about wasted cost. That phosphorus over applying is going to cost you about $20 an acre. So even with high fertilizer prices, I think about what's the minimum you need to be economical and still get a profitable yield.
Tom? What were your thoughts on that?
I think it's a terrible, so when you have a really low fertility site, the implications of that are that not only do you have to feed your crop, but you have to also feed the soil, because what you apply is going to be captured by the soil and not really available to the plant. So it's a terrible year to try to put inputs into very low fertility ground. And I'd almost say, look for your fields that have maybe one nutrient of concern, rather than, a complete, low fertility status on PK, it's just not a good year to you're just going to have to live with it, I think.
Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, and I think if you've already leased it and you're in a lease, talk to the owner and see if you can modify that lease for this year. I think that's with these fertilizer prices are unprecedented. So I think that's pretty reasonable. to your, try to talk about some of that, reduce the fees or whatever it is. So.
Yeah, definitely, Ben. If especially and I think that this happens a lot with farmland that we lease. Producers are kind of timid about putting a lot of expensive fertilizer on, and then a year or two you lose that lease. Because that fertilizer and lime is an investment in that land. We have a question on the chat box. Ben or Tom, do you know of the Soil Test Pro app? Do you know about that for GPS precision ag?
Do not.
No prior knowledge.
Okay. Someone was talking about that. Also, can you hit, is there a difference in soil sampling depth, maybe between a row crop or tilled ground versus hay and pasture fields? Recommendation.
Go ahead, Ben.
Rooting depth. I mean, that's the key to it. So forage crop, pasture, hay, you're looking at probably at 2 to 4 inches. Row crops, you're looking at plow depth, so probably about that 6 to 8 inches or so. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, that's kind of the standard. Tom, do you have any other?
Yeah, we did some comparisons, and so we've sort of ended up with a 2-inch hay and pasture sample where there's no tillage, there's no soil disturbance, and so we've sort of set our fertility up with those 2-inch samples. Again, 6 inches for cultivated arable land is typical. And talking about soil depth and soil probes, we have an opportunity this winter to purchase a number of probes to distribute out to the counties, and how much of a benefit, from the group here, do you feel that would be to have, 2 or 3 soil probes per county office?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. And I guess both for Ben and Tom, would it still be a good idea to just go ahead and try to do as many soil tests as you can this year to make sure that you've got up-to-date nutrient levels for proper fertility? Ben?
Couldn't hurt. I mean, I think you got to make decisions. So if you have to prioritize one field versus the other, go ahead and get them all, and that way you can make a plan. I mean, I'll let Tom, and I want to go back to that no-till. I got something to add to that, but.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, I mentioned, with no-till, yeah, you're looking probably about that 2 to 4 inch sampling depth, but a lot, especially over a number of years, you actually get nutrient stratification, where a lot of those nutrients are built up and are kind of above that rooting zone. Probably the best thing is to do a little bit of tillage. I know that's kind of sacrilege to talk about tilling a no-till field, but the University of Nebraska had a real good study that, they call it strategic tillage, I believe, but having just that 1 year tillage to kind of help break it up really has no impact on some of the benefits of no-till. So that might be something to consider too.
Okay. Tom, did you have any thing to add on that, or the talking about the soil testing?
Yeah, I think that getting a complete picture, and then I when I look at my neighbors and I see how they'll apply the same amount on all their hay fields, and so I would call that it's management, but it's low management. Whereas if you have that opportunity to have 5 soil samples from 5 different hay fields, and be able to look and decide, I can forego applications on this field for P and K and just do a nitrogen program and concentrate on another field that has poorer fertility. I think that's the way to strategically, make decisions this year, every year, but this year is a no-brainer.
Right. Okay, we're kind of getting towards the end of our time for today, but a follow-up from the first question that we had, and I'll start with Ben. How get your crystal ball out? How long do you think these fertilizer prices, high prices, are going to be around?
I'm
We're
not
looking
even
for a
gonna
long
try to
haul or short
guess.
term.
I tell you what, I don't know. I use just triple, I said don't use triple 19. That's kind of my source. I mean, it was $850 a ton in December. And I can't remember who told me where I saw that, but they're expecting $1,200 a ton by spring, potentially. Now it may not happen, but potentially. So, and I guess, the people who've done a good job managing fertility in the past years are probably going to they're going to benefit this year from it because they may not need to apply or be able to get by with less. So I think, think about that in terms of next year. If you get hit the bad this year, start thinking about developing a good fertility plan. So if you have another year like this, you'll be a little bit better off.
Tom?
Well, I think that, farmers they can shift, and I've already heard talk of people are going to shift from corn to soybeans so that they don't have that nitrogen bill to pay for, and hope that commodity price will keep them in the black and keep them profitable. So I think that, we may see, these prices linger on. We have tariffs that are in place, that have a lifetime. They're like 5-year tariffs, and they're going to continue on for more than just this growing season. So it's a challenge, but get your soil probe out and go make a plan.
And I think on some of these hay crops too, it's a perfect chance, especially if you're producing your own hay for your own needs, but perfect chance to learn how to extend the grazing season a little bit. Graze that from a fertility standpoint, you're not removing as much. It's a good way to kind of learn how to adapt your management.
Well, and one other thing about nitrogen is that, before the Second World War, we had a real legume-based nitrogen program in this country. We used rotations. We had, we really pushed our agricultural production with legumes, and we've gotten lazy with cheap nitrogen, and suddenly it's expensive, just like it was in 2008. And we, and hay and pasture farms, we could really drive our farms on a legume basis if we choose to do that management.
I mean, in Kentucky, I said people were kind of addicted to nitrogen fertilizer because, I mean, it's a visual. You see it growing. They like to see it growing. It's not always economical. Again, investing in these legumes are a long term. It's an investment, and you have to protect your investment. And you may not see a yield benefit to the next year, but they will eventually be more productive, and definitely this year be more economical.
Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience for Tom or Ben? I'm sure that we've got many people that have maybe got a question about fertility or how that's going to affect their profitability this year on the farm. I see that we had Evan join us. Evan, how you doing, brother?
Good. I've been talking about orange for 2 hours. I'm going good.
Okay. Brandy, do you have any questions for Ben or Tom?
Yeah, I was wondering, can you provide any details, maybe Tom, about the Appalachian Grazing Conference? Do you know any details? I know it's coming up in March.
I think that's Ed Rayburn question for Ed rather than myself. I think they're
Okay, well, I just had the dates. I just wanted to give a plug if I didn't know if there would be something related to nutrient management at the grazing conference or not, but
Brandy, Brandy, this is Audra. I was on a conference, Appalachian Grazing Conference call earlier in the week, and it is a go. And yes, they're in the process of nailing down, securing all of their breakout session speakers. So in the next few days or in the next week, you should see a good listing of that on their website.
Perfect.
And I'll give a plug for it. If you've never been for it, it's a good program. It's the 11th and 12th of March. I think there's actually tours on the 10th.
10th, 11th, and 12th, yes.
10th, 11th, and 12th. I think, for everybody really want to learn a little bit more about how to become a better manager or just a refresher, I think it's a great conference to attend. I mean, I think being involved with some of these, it's in Morgantown at the Hyatt or Marriott.
I think it's Waterfront.
Waterfront.
Marriott.
Yeah.
Yes. I've not been to an Appalachian Grazing Conference that I have not learned something that I can utilize in my operation. I highly recommend it to anyone that has any inkling into grazing whatever species that your little heart desires. And yeah, it's very good. And through all of the conservation districts out there, there are scholarships. So if you know of constituents in your counties that are interested in grazing, there's free rides out there through their local conservation offices to get their registration covered for that conference also. So, okay, there's my plug for the grazing conference.
And I'll add, even if you consider yourself an expert level producer, never underestimate hearing something you think you already know, because you'll hear a different perspective on it. Definitely, something you may not have thought of. So,
all right.
I
Thanks,
think
Audra.
I think
Appreciate
the
it.
conference costs oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, JJ.
Go
I
ahead,
think
Brandy.
the conference cost about $200, but I mean, considering what you can pick up at this conference, I think it's well worth your investment if you're a livestock producer wanting to improve your grazing practices for sure. I mean, even if it's somebody in school, they have student rates, so definitely get on their website and check it out.
Okay. We're at that point in the program where I always say that my dad told me that there's two types of music, country and Western. So I'm going to start with Tom. Who is your favorite country artist? Or are you a big country music fan?
I kind of like Waylon Jennings. Do you know that name?
I know. He's the man. That's Hoss.
Tom stole mine. So I'll admit I haven't really listened to radio that much. My wife got me hooked on podcasts. And so right now I'm going to say Ag PhD is one of the better ones. And there's a lot of other ones. I know Kevin Schaefer has turned me on to several. So
Oh,
now that's a letdown. Well, we'll put one in the a blast from the past.
and Mountaineer Farm Talk.
Mountaineer Farm Talk. That's right. I'll put in a plug for the for Merle Haggard. We haven't mentioned him, and probably one of the greatest songwriters country music history. Merle Haggard, classic. I just wanted to mention that programs and activities offered by West Virginia University Extension Service are available to all persons without regard to race, color, sex, disability, religion, age, veteran status, political beliefs, sexual orientation, national origin, and marital or family status. And once again, I want to thank Tom and Ben for being our special guest here on Mountaineer Farm Talk, the voice of West Virginia agriculture. Do we have any other questions from the audience before we sign off? And next week, we're going to talk about transitioning the farm, and we will have David Marison from Ohio State Extension and Jesse Richardson from the West Virginia University College of Law will be our special guests. So I'm excited about having them next Friday, and I hope that everyone stays warm, and we'll see you next week. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks for
JJ.
having us.